Hello everybody, my name is Rainey, and I'm going to spend the next half an hour talking to you about kids growing up in a cashless world. Now, teaching kids about money is so important. We know from research that kids learn many of their adult money behaviors by the age of 7. So what we want to do today is make sure our kids start off on the right foot. Before I start going into what we're going to talk about, let me just quickly introduce myself. As I said, my name is Rainey, and I'm the founder of a financial education platform called Blue Tree Savings. I'm also the author of a children's book called Grandpa's Fortune Fables, fun stories to teach kids about money. But before I started teaching kids and parents about money, most of my adult life, I've been working in the financial services industry. I was head of investment strategy for a global consulting firm, both in London and then in Hong Kong. So I was advising retirement schemes, insurance companies and sovereign wealth funds across Asia how to invest their millions and a lot of times billions of dollars, making sure that they made the right financial decisions. But in 2019, my 2 young daughters, they're now 7 and 9, were growing up so fast. And so my wife and I decided, right, we're going to take some time off our full-time corporate jobs to make sure we had that time with them as they were growing up. So we decided to move from Hong Kong to Vietnam, where I'm recording this from, to make sure we had that quality time with them. And it turns out that we were quite one of the very few people who could have this opportunity, because my wife and I have been diligent savers and investors of our money for the longest time. So when we wanted to leave and spend this time with our children, we had the financial resources to do so. But it turns out we're one of the minority. And what we wanted to do is make sure that our children grow up with that same savings and investing mindset so they can have opportunities like we have now. And so I spent a lot of time trying to teach my daughters about money. And there wasn't that many resources to do that. So as I had this free time with my kids at school, I was going to make those resources. And that's how Blue Tree started. And I've been spending the last 2.5 years helping parents teach their kids about money by writing articles every week to break down a particular money topic and teach it and use stories and analogies to make teaching kids fun, both for the parents and for the children. So that's a bit of background about me. Let's crack on with what we're going to talk about in this session. And that is all about moving into this cashless world. How can we make sure our kids are ready? And I'm going to break this down into 3 parts. Part 1, I'm going to talk about the kind of dangers of moving into this cashless society. What does it mean and what can we do? The second is talking about the lessons that we need to replace now that we don't use cash. And the third is that the pocket money apps are great, but they're not teaching our kids about money. So we need to. So let's go to the first one. The dangers of being in a cashless society. So I want you to imagine that we're in this scenario and you've got an executive of a company and they're all sitting down with the board and saying, right, how can we make more money? Because that's what companies want to do. How can we get people to spend more money? One of the company employees says, I know, let's make payments cashless. This way, people will be able to spend their money before they really can think about what they really want and need. And you can imagine that's music to the chief executive's ears, because he's like, that's great. People will be spending more and they'll thank us for it being convenient. And that's exactly what happens. We are now living in this world where we do use our cards, our watches, our phones, or internet just to tap away, and we can make payments very, very quickly. And we're like really grateful. We don't have to go to the ATM to get money out. We don't have to sort out which notes we do and don't have. We can just use our cards and tap away. And we're really happy about that. But what's happening, and research has shown, is as we use this contactless, we are spending more. And there's a couple of reasons for that. But one is that we don't see money going away and therefore we don't feel that pain. But there's actually been more research by MIT that did some analysis where they got a group of different people and kind of measured their brain activity when they're spending both with cash and with credit card. And what they saw was that there's a huge desire pulse coming through in the brain when we use our credit cards. So we get this kind of euphoria feeling when we do. And the more we spend, the more we get that, and we more kind of crave it. But also we get more of an incentive to spend more with credit cards. So when they were testing people and they gave them the kind of same amount, they would end up spending higher amounts on different purchases when they were using credit cards. So it shows that there is an actual danger that by using cashless, not only are we going to spend more, we're going to spend in more frequency, but we're actually going to spend more in terms of dollar amounts. So what does this mean for you and your children? So first tip is to make sure that we don't give our children these cards at a young age. We need to make sure that we give our children the education about money and saving before we kind of let them loose with these cards. So if you're thinking about giving your children one of these prepaid debit cards or pocket money apps, I recommend that you just hold fire a little while. And if your children are already using those cards, suggest to them that they take a little bit of time off and start using some cash instead. And I'll come on to some more of the lessons about cash in part 2. So that's one tip. The second tip, and I think this is very, very important, and this is all about teaching kids about why we spend money. What causes us to spend money? And a lot of that is down to marketing. Think about it. When we're growing up, we don't get any kind of training about not spending. Maybe if your parents were savvy savers, they might provide some of that education. But there's not many other resources out there, not companies spending money teaching us how to keep our money. But yet on the other side, there's companies collectively spending billions, finding out how to make us spend. They are using tactics about how our brains work. They're using scarcity and authority and all these different tricks to make us spend. So we need to make sure, first thing is awareness. So I'm just going to share one of the quick stories from my book, Grandpa's Fortune Fables. Because in that book, one of the chapters is about a character called Richie Raccoon. And he had loads of money, but he didn't look after it and he lost it. And so what he wants to do is start saving again. So he's spoken to Grandpa and Grandpa's given him some tips. And so what Grandpa does is says, right, go to the other side of this island, which they're on, and start planting your seeds. And in the book, seeds is money, and they need to grow this kind of financial forest. So this Richie Raccoon character goes to the other side of the island. But on his way there, he has to go through this village. And every single time he goes into the village, there's someone there who gives him the best deal ever. First, there's the baker who gives him the cake that he hasn't had for a long time. It's something he's been desiring for ages, and the baker knows this. And he says, oh, it's only going to be a little bit of money. You'll still have plenty left. And he kind of gives in to that desire. Then the next day he tries to go through the village, and they're like, you can't wear those clothes to do that activity. You need your own clothes. You're going to ruin those. It's going to cost you more if you don't buy these clothes. And again, it's like, oh, these little tricks to say, oh, I am going to, in the future, I might save myself some money, so I need to spend today. And then the last one is the kind of classic 2-for-1 deal. It's going to be today or never. You have to take this deal, and you're going to be saving yourself money in the future because you're getting 2-for-1 now. And again, he always struggles to get through the village and hold on to his money. And at the end of the story, Grandpa teaches Richie Raccoon that instead of going through the village, he makes sure that every time he goes around the village and plants his seeds, and then goes into the village and sees his friends and maybe spend whatever seeds he doesn't plant. And it's just a really powerful story, and children love the story as well as parents, because it really teaches them that there's always going to be these good deals out there. And there's no point in trying to fight it and say, I'm just going to walk through the village with my eyes closed and just run through. It never really works. They know too much. They're too clever. The best thing is always to go around the village, plant your seeds. So this is the classic, make sure you save before you spend. And with my daughters, we always say, make sure you go around the village, not through the village. And just this level of awareness about why we spend can make a big difference to your children. Because again, most people are never taught, and the companies are spending billions to do that. So that's the second tip. Now, I've got one third tip for you, but this one's for you. Now, it's very short. And this is, in a cashless world, make sure you don't save your credit card details on your computer. Because what happens is we're going to fall right into their traps, and we're going to spend more impulsively. If we have to go in and every time we're purchasing have to click in and write in the sort of long digit numbers and our names and our expiry dates, we're going to be less, oh, do I really want this? And then you go, actually, I don't really want this. And you're going to save yourself from this impulsive spending. So that's just a little tip for you on that one. So that kind of brings us to kind of see the dangers of how we spend and how cashless cards is kind of a danger to not just to our kids, but to us as adults. And so what we need to do is make sure we get our kids into the habit of saving a little bit before they spend. And this means before we give them a debit card or any kind of digital cashless payment, we teach them to save before they spend. Okay, now we're moving on to part 2. This is all about replacing the lessons that cash would naturally give us. So everyone listening to this has grown up using cash to pay things as we were growing up. And that meant we kind of learned some of these lessons that we probably take for granted. So I'm just going to go through 4 of those lessons in these next few slides. And because what we need to do is make sure that we are more proactive in teaching our kids these and making sure that we're not just taking for granted that our kids are going to naturally pick these up. It's so much safer, and our kids are going to be so much more robust if we do teach them these particular lessons. So let's go through them one by one. So number 1, teaching children that money is real. Again, feels very, very obvious to us, but in a world where children are playing games on their apps, on the computers, where it's got kind of computer game money in there, how do they tell that's different from real money? It seems to them it's just a number on a screen and you pay pressing a button in both cases. So it's very, very hard for them to really get that concept, especially when money is invisible. So what we need to do is make sure our children really understand when money is being transferred. When money is real, it's tangible. We need to get some dollar notes. We need to get some and show them that this is what money is. And this is when we're paying for things online or tapping our cards or our watches or our phones. The money is there and it's real money that's being transferred. And there's a classic story, and we're hearing more and more of these, so it's an 11-year-old girl in the UK, and she spent equivalent to around 9,000 Singapore dollars playing the game Roblox. And when they sort of discovered this vast amounts, and they said, why did you spend this much money? And she said, I didn't realize it was real. I thought it was just like Monopoly money. Again, 11-year-old taking bits that we take for granted. She didn't realize money was real. And so we need to be as proactive to teaching our kids when they're playing games to make sure they're only playing with game money versus real money. So that's number 1. Make sure your children learn that money is real. The second is to make sure that our children realize that when they're spending money, a transaction is happening. Again, when we're using money, cash as we were growing up, we saw that when we go to the shops to buy something, we give some money, the shopkeeper takes the money, and we take the goods that we want. So they're getting something and we're getting something in return. And it's clear that there's a transaction going on. However, when we don't have this cash, we just have this magical card and we can go around and tap everywhere. It doesn't feel like a transaction. But you go in with the card, you tap, you leave with the card. But you also leave with something else, the goods that you are buying. So it's not, what does the shopkeeper get? It's not clear. They're not witnessing the shopkeeper receiving anything as part of that transaction. It just feels like you've got this pressing the button and suddenly you get these free goods. Now I know that sounds extreme, but think of it from our children's side. They're not seeing that transaction, and if we're not proactive, they might not fully grasp that the transaction is happening. So recommend when you are next in the shops, make sure your children know exactly what's happened once you're tapping your phone, your card or your watch, whichever cashless method that you're using. And make sure they understand that, just to let you know, when I tap that, some money went from my bank account to the shopkeeper's bank account. And this is really, really important for another reason. So I talk to a lot of parents about investing and teaching children about how the stock market works. And one of the key elements of that is teaching kids about where money comes from and where money goes. So I say when I was teaching my daughters, I said, we were in a McDonald's at the time, and I said, you see those people queuing up? When they're going up, they're giving some of their money to McDonald's. So those people are getting a little bit poorer, but McDonald's is getting a little bit richer. And because we're investing in lots and lots of companies, one of those being McDonald's, that means as McDonald's makes more money, they make more money. And they can see that when people are buying and that transaction's happening, the shopkeeper in McDonald's in that example is getting richer. And as they own McDonald's or a small piece of it, they're also getting richer. So again, making sure they understand that that transaction is happening helps them learn other topics, such as investing in the stock market. So second one, make sure your kids understand a transaction is happening. Third one, and this is really important, is that once it's gone, it's gone. Once you spend it, it's gone. And when we were growing up and we had the cash, we had the money in our hands, we'd give it to a shopkeeper and we'd see that it disappears into the till. It feels like it's gone. Whereas when we're using these contactless things, you're not seeing anything being taken away. So this goes back to the transaction point I made before. But the other bit is you don't have that sense of pain. When you see something taken away from you, you kind of go, oh, I wish I'd had that. I feel empty now that my wallet's empty, all the money's gone. And therefore you feel like you're a bit more protective about spending. And we see this in the research where people, again, using cards versus cash. Most people will spend less using cash because they feel that pain. They see the pain of giving something away. And so we need to teach our children that when we are using the contactless payments and systems, that money is being taken away from us. And again, if you can show your children a statement or a bank account or something, an app on your phone that shows the money sort of going away and the number starting big and getting smaller, they can have a more of appreciation. Okay, right, I have this amount of money, this transaction happens, and it goes. Again, when we'll talk a bit later about some of the apps, and they are fantastic at helping for that, but you still need to be proactive in opening that app and teaching them that lesson. It's not going to be a natural lesson for them. So that's the third one, is make sure that they appreciate that once they do spend some money, it's gone. These cards aren't an infinite resource of money. You know, as much as children like to think they are, we need to teach them, no, we have money in our bank account. That money is not unlimited. And so when we're spending, we're getting a little bit poorer and that money's going down. Seems simple, but we need to teach our children. And then the fourth one, and this is a really big one, and that's understanding how much things cost. Remember, when we're going to the shops with cash, we need to go to the till, and the till, they'll say this is $12. And so we need to go to our wallets and get out that right amount. And we pass it over. And as we're going through that transaction of getting the money out and getting the change and making sure the change is right, we have a good understanding that it costs $12. And now, I don't know if you've ever had this, and I know plenty of people have. Now we're in this contactless world. We can go into somewhere, go to the till, be a bit sleepy or distracted, tap on our cards, go away, and then my wife would be, how much was that? And I'll be like, I don't actually know, I just tapped. And you kind of lose that sense of how much things are cost. And so what we need to do is kind of be able to get our children to understand, and again, using cash or being more proactive. So every time our children do buy, make sure they're very clear about how much those things cost. And with that, they get a sense of relativities. I think that's the really important thing about when we're going to the shops, spending either for ourselves, but our children there, or children spending, is getting to understand how much things cost. And one example I thought was fantastic, and I want to share it with you, is this, a father had two children, and he went to the supermarket, and they wanted something, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but he felt it was too expensive. It was a waste of money. So it was over £5, I believe, for like a magazine. And he didn't think so. And so he wanted to teach his children about the value of money. So he gave them £5 and said, right, you have to go around this supermarket. I want you to get as much food as possible out of that £5. And we're going to give that food to a food bank. So it goes to the homeless and the needy. And so these children went around the store and they had to try and make the most of that £5, which is around roughly 10 Singapore dollars. And they had to go and get as much food, what they think would be appropriate. And doing so, they have to see, right, what's the cheapest, what's most expensive, what's the most efficient way of using that money. And it was such a great way for children to learn the value of money, which they might have naturally picked up if they had money in terms of cash. But now they were in a cashless world, they didn't really appreciate it, but this little exercise did. So I strongly recommend that if you're in the supermarket next time, give your children that little task. I'm sure it will be eye-opening. Plus it helps them understand that they can help others as well. So they're the 4 lessons that we can really miss out on now we're not using cash. Now, you might be saying to yourself, but that's all well and good, but we don't use cash now, so we can't give our children cash. And so 2 things for that. One, if you do, you can go and it takes a little bit of effort, but you can get that cash. But appreciate it can be hard work, and sometimes you might need that cash and use it for something else rather than for your children. So one tip I say to parents is it doesn't have to be real money. And this sounds a bit counterintuitive, but if you just give your children pieces of card, chop them up and put different amounts on, and then you can use those within the household to give your children pocket money or allowance. And then when they do want to spend, what you're doing is they're going to do a transaction with you. So if they've saved up to buy a new book, then they can give those pieces of paper, which you've given of the right amount to you, and then you can go and buy the book for them using your card. But what they're seeing is that they've got to try and save up these pieces of paper or these tokens. They have to work out how many they need, and they're essentially learning these lessons. So they get to see that kind of money is real, it's touchable. They've got these tokens. They see that a transaction has to take place, because when they want to buy something, they have to give you the tokens. And they'll learn that once they give those tokens to you, they have to wait until their next birthday or tooth fairy before they get that money back. So again, they're learning money's real. But also they have to get that fourth lesson, which is all about value of things. So they have to try and work out how many tokens they need. So appreciate that having cash is a bit harder work. So try and use this token approach. It's something I've used with my daughters before we moved to Vietnam. Luckily, Vietnam is a cash society, so we have lots of notes for my children. But in a world, I appreciate Singapore is moving to a cashless place. So that's one tip. Right, now let's move to our 3rd and final part of this topic about cashless. Now, as we move to cashless, there's much of these technology companies that are starting up to provide pocket money apps, or they're providing prepaid debit cards. And I think the technology is fantastic. I really do. It makes it smooth, it makes it convenient, but it has those dangers. One of the big dangers is, as we talked about in part 1, it can make our children spend more. But the second piece is that a lot of the marketing and a lot of the sort of presumption is that if our children use this, they will become better with money. And it talks about that, and a lot of the marketing is a financial education tool. They really aren't. The analogy I use, which I have on the slide, is to say that if you give your children a calculator, they're not suddenly going to become good at maths. And the same thing with these tools. If your children aren't given the right education and the right guidance, they could actually end up spending more with these cards. So what we need to do is make sure that our children are educated about money, that they start to form some habits of making sure they save some every time they get some before they start spending. And this makes it really powerful for them. And then once you've been trained up, then you can use these tools. And I think the same applies to not just children, but adults as well, before they get given a credit card. So credit cards are fantastic if you're educated about them. So I use a credit card because it's convenient. I use a credit card because it gives me some security, reward points, but I don't use it for any kind of debt or impulse spending. So it's a great tool, but because I've had that education before. If I didn't have that education before, like so many others, I might just see it as a convenient way to have money that I'll get in the future and I'll start spending. And it can be a very dangerous tool. So whilst I like the concept and the technology is fantastic, it allows children to see how much they've got and start saving up for tools. That do not give your children one of these and expect them to suddenly be robust savers of their money. They could end up spending more. I can remember if I was a sort of a 10-year-old and someone gave me this shiny card and said, here you go, you've got this responsibility, go, and it's got this amount of money on it, I'd straight away want to go and play with it and think of it as a toy and go and spend. And we have to remember that also a lot of the way in which these companies make money is actually via a transaction cost. So they actually get some money when we do spend. Same with credit cards and other forms of cashless payments. So with this, there's a little bit of an incentive for us to actually spend, and limited to make us sort of save our money for the long term. Now, don't get me wrong, some of them do allow you to save up for your children to save up for something in the future, but ultimately you're going to still spend that money. It doesn't talk about wealth building, and that means saving for the very long time and having that money grow. So great tools, but have the education first. And so if you are using them already, maybe just encourage you and your children to take a little bit of a break, use some cash or the tokens, learn some new skills, and then go back to those tools. And this leads me on to my penultimate slide, which is just about my book, which is called Grandpa's Fortune Fables. And so this book has been around for a couple of months now, and it's been very, very well received, with many people saying it's the best money book for kids. And the reason that people are enjoying it so much is that it uses stories to help children learn a lot of the money lessons. Lots of those which are going to be we need to replace with cash no longer being there. But it talks about earning money, it talks about saving money, it talks about growing money and patience, as well as avoiding debt, gambling and scams. And many of these lessons are not there, are not taught in pretty much any schools around the world. But the book allows parents to sit with their children and read each chapter has a different topic and a different stories. And at the end of the chat has a discussion point, and you get some great insights into your children's thoughts about money. And it also gives them opportunity to see if they can crack Grandpa's mystery code, which has gone down really, really well. So if you have enjoyed this talk and you want to encourage your children to learn about money, then please do check out Grandpa's Fortune Fables. It's available on Amazon, or you can get more details around the book and myself from bluetreesavings.com. So that comes to the end of my presentation. So as a summary, make sure that you help your children, talk to your children about money and help them learn about the money lessons we would have got from using cash. So money is real, a transaction is going on. Once it's spent, it is gone, and help them learn the value of different things. Once they have that concept about money and cash, then you can start talking to them about how to build that wealth over time and learn about money and what I call the 3 rules of wealth. So that's keep 1 out of every $10 they receive, help them grow that money by investing. And then the key one is to make sure that they're patient. And if they follow these 3 rules of wealth, I have no doubt that they'll grow up to be financially healthy and wealthy. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation. And if you have any questions or want to get in contact with me, then please contact me at will@bluetreesavings.com. Thank you so much, and goodbye.